Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Reverend Matt and I am the Connectionalist. And today I'm with my friend Jonathan Kleinsmith, who looks cozy in his office right now. And he's going to be talking to us about a new book that he has, but he's also a United Methodist pastor as well in Oklahoma City. And so we're going to be having kind of a conversation a little bit about his book, but also kind of about the United Methodist Church, where it's at. And we're just going to see where the conversation takes us today. But I'm excited to be with you, Jonathan. Welcome.
Matt, I'm always excited to be with you, man. Uh, is that
Yeah.
hyperbolic enough? Did I start off on the right foot?
Yeah, no, it was great. That's exactly what I want to see. A little bit of energy coming right out of the gate. Jonathan and I were in seminary together at St. Paul School of Theology. Yep, there we go. St. Paul School of Theology, which of course one of the 13 United Methodist seminaries for the young men that I know are watching. If you're interested in seminary, there's plenty out there. Do your research. Make sure you're picking one that's a good fit for you because seminary is a really important time. And there's actually a lot of people. Discerning a call to ministry who watch and everybody you got to do your research on that because it's 3 years at least of your life, so it takes a while to finish.
Yeah, well, and the other thing about that, like, we are part of a denomination that values education in their
Right,
ministers.
right.
And I think it's incredibly valuable to have a minister that that knows what the delay of the parousia means, right?
Yeah, exactly. I no, it is because I mean a lot of times too as a Methodist pastor you're going to be maybe the only learned theologian in town. There might be some that are haven't studied or anything like that who are pastors in town, but it's very important to study because people are going to rely on you wherever you're
Yeah.
going to be that voice for them. So yeah, it's incredibly important. So yeah, Jonathan and I know each other from seminary, but today we're going to be talking about Jonathan's book. Jonathan's wrote a book, or at least he's done with a draft of it. Where are you at on it?
I'd say it's probably about 70% done. I've got all the chapters done, but
Okay.
there's some pretty rough grammar towards the last chapters. I wouldn't read the last part of my book, but yeah, it's in the stage where my literary agent is trying to get me to shill it to people. Uh, on
So here we are. Here
Here
we
we
are.
are.
And so your book, it's called The Deeply Spiritual Act of Being Disappointed. Did I get that
Yeah,
right?
you nailed it, Matt. You nailed
And
it.
I read some of the foreword. And Jonathan, you grew up in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And look, here's the thing: we're both Okies here.
Yes.
I grew up in Green Country, is what we call Northeast Oklahoma. It's often called Green Country, which is a very different place in Oklahoma
It's
than where you grew up.
yes.
Oklahoma is for those of you who don't know, it's a very unique place geographically. A lot of people don't understand that the western part of the state and the eastern part of the state are very different culturally and geographically because they're very different in their climate and what's going on, and that's not always true from state to state. Western Oklahoma, especially the Panhandle, it's lovingly called no man's land,
Yeah.
and it's been called that throughout history. And it's a kind of a place where I feel like people get forgotten,
Yeah.
and that's kind of what your book, it seems, when I read the foreword, it was kind of, that was a main theme is like, this is a place where I grew up. And so I understand some of this stuff. And so I kind of just want to hear your take on what the book's about and kind of your upbringing and experiences.
Yeah, so I that first chapter I do talk about my upbringing in the Oklahoma Panhandle. For those of you that don't know, you'll sometimes see a graphic like of the Oklahoma Panhandle with just a circle around it and arrows that say what happens here.
Yeah.
The Oklahoma Panhandle is an area that's the size of Puerto Rico, and it has a population of 27,000 people.
Yeah.
There are three counties in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and all three of them have a population density of less than 10 people per square mile. And one, Cimarron County, it's like 1.5 people per square mile.
Yeah.
And so it is a kind of a desolate place. But the example I use at the beginning of my book, I talk about this project that was done by the Army Corps of Engineers, where they are building a lake in the Oklahoma Panhandle, and the lake theoretically would have brought in tens of thousands of visitors each year, millions of dollars worth of income from tourism and things like that. And they built a mile. Oh, what is it? It's a 5 mile long dam in the middle of nowhere and they're trying to stop up the Beaver River and create this dam there. And the problem is they did all their research for this during the FDR, New
Right,
Deal,
the New Deal. Yeah.
and they built it in the 70s. So their research was about 40 years out of date, and basically the water would have really been provided by the Ogallala Aquifer, which has just been draining for centuries. It's a non-renewable water source, and so the lake never filled up at all. There was a time when I was a kid that we would go out to the lake, and it was about 3 feet deep, and literally you would see cows walking across the middle of it. And so now it's basically completely a dry hole in the ground, and I use that to talk about disappointment, right?
Yeah.
Now your disappointment might not be a a hole in the middle of nowhere. It actually, just side note, you should go out there and check it out. It's one of the most desolate and lonely places you'll ever be in your entire life.
Yeah, I've been out there actually multiple times.
Oh my gosh, you're one of the select few.
Yeah, I've gone to Black Mesa State Park, which is famous for its night skies, and I'm an astronomer guy. I like to do telescope stuff, and went out there to hike as well just a few years ago. Saw, there's just not a lot out there. I mean, I walked into Boise City, is the county seat of Cimarron County, which is the furthest out. And I walked into
it's the county seat. It's got a population of about 1,500 people.
1,500 people in the county seat, which is a crazy number. And I walked into a diner for breakfast, and everybody turned and looked at me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I was like, they all know that I don't live here, like immediately, because they know everybody. And it was an interesting experience. And so, it talk to me a little bit about why you wanted to write a book about disappointment.
Yeah. So, it's really so you and I both went to seminary.
Yeah.
As we established early on in this podcast. But one of the things that you'll notice about seminary is it doesn't teach you everything. No. And a big area that we barely even touched on in seminary was the concept of theodicy. And for those of you that don't like $5 church words, theodicy is basically the question of, if God is good, then why does evil exist? If God is good, why is there suffering in the world? What's God's solution for suffering in the world? And as theologians, we have answers for that, but most of them are not accessible, and most of the time we don't talk about it. We spend a lot of time avoiding the topic of theodicy because it just seems so hard. You'll notice that not a lot of our hymns deal with theodicy. Not a lot of our liturgy deals with theodicy. It's kind of the big hole in our theological response to what the world needs, but it's actually one of the biggest questions that non-believers have is, if there's a God, and if God is all-powerful, why do I experience suffering? Why do the people I love die? And that's why I wrote the book. And I used the dam as a kind of a funny illustration early on, but as something that is disappointing. But we all have bigger disappointments in our lives than a 5-mile dam in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so I wrote the book because I'm trying to address some of those things. And certainly greater theological minds than mine have tried to tackle this issue. But what I try to do is I also try to make it accessible. And I spend a little bit of time doing apologetics, which is not the most popular thing in United Methodism.
No.
But I think that you would probably agree, Matt, because even though we're different people in a lot of ways, we're also wired similarly when how we think about the world. And I think that so I spend the entire second chapter talking about, is there even a God for us to be disappointed in? And so I cover topics like that, like prayer, all approaching it from the idea that we experience deep disappointment at the deepest level. And then ultimately, what is our disappointment telling us? because it's not just a useless thing. It actually points to something bigger, right?
Right.
If we're disappointed, what does that reveal about our values, first of all? But also, ultimately, if we live a life where we experience disappointment, what are we comparing it to? And C.S. Lewis and N.T. Wright have both kind of made that point before, but it's, if we're saying this world is imperfect, which I am,
Yeah.
what are we comparing it to? Because none of us have ever experienced a perfect world. None of us, and so that points to something beyond ourselves. Anyways, I kind of just verbally vomited
No.
different sporadic points of the book all over the place, and so
No, that what your comment about apologetics was interesting because I've been quoted before as saying apologetics is a waste of time, which is a incredibly United Methodist opinion to have.
it is.
But now I've found myself doing Protestant apologetics on YouTube, and I don't know how that happened. But I do know how it happened, but I'm not going to go into that. But I think that's an interesting. It was just an interesting comment that you made that it in the world we live in now, before you can even start a theology of disappointment, you have to make this case of like, yes, do we even have a God to be disappointed in? And it's an interesting place to start. So tell me about like kind of the apologetic angle you took in that chapter.
Yeah. So, man, where do I start? So, what's really interesting, some of the biggest tech moguls out there, the people that we would say are futurists or that we would say are the big brains of our society, people like Elon Musk or Neil Tyson deGrasse, right? They have actually stated publicly that they're intrigued by the possibility that we might be living in a simulation, right?
Right.
And the reason for that is because there are so many things in creation, or from a scientific standpoint, in the universe as a whole, that seem to point to the idea that there is a design behind it all.
Right.
And so people that believe that we're living in a simulation or that we're living in a virtual reality will point to those things and say, yeah, this must be a simulation. This must be a virtual reality. And my personal opinion on that is when you take that stand, you're basically acknowledging there is a creator, but I don't want to. I don't want to acknowledge that God exists, right?
Right.
I don't want to say it was God. I'd rather say I'm living in some sort of computer simulation, or I'm a brain in a vat somewhere, or reality doesn't matter. But when you do that, there's a problem that comes along with that. If I view this as a simulation or as a game, how do I treat other people? Right? Like, because if it's just a game, then I'm going to do whatever I can to make sure that I win the game.
Right.
Right, and when you take God out of the equation, especially when you take Jesus out of the equation, and the idea that other people are made in the image of God, and that Jesus calls us to care for them, then you're just left with a cruel reality where we're all trying to gain something at the expense of others. So I spend time talking about,
Okay.
I actually talk about that stargazing aspect of the Oklahoma Panhandle. Right?
Yeah.
Like just the order that seems to be inherent in the cosmos, right? Like, it just where the placement of where the Earth is, right? If we're in the Goldilocks zone, if we were any closer to the sun, our atmosphere would burn up, burn away.
Yep.
If we were any further away from the sun, it would be too cold and life wouldn't form. If we didn't have our moon, we wouldn't have tides, we wouldn't have seasons. If we didn't have our Earth tilting on an axis at just the right way, we wouldn't have currents either that help stir up the building blocks of life. If we didn't have gas giants or the asteroid belt or the Oort cloud, if we didn't have so many different things creating magnetic interference for us, we would be wiped off the planet by asteroids all the time, right? Like, there's so many finely tuned things that make life possible just from an astrophysics standpoint. But then you look closer, like at human DNA. Human DNA is fascinating to me. It's basically, it's a language. It is something that seems to just be impossible to explain outside of the concept of design. And so I take, I kind of take just a a rotisserie approach to all of it, and kind of just
A Showtime grill. A
right?
Showtime grill
The
approach.
anthropic
Yeah.
principle, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, the argument, from human ethics. Where does my concept of good or evil come from? I kind of just throw it all in a pot and then make some funny comments about it, and that's that chapter. But
Well,
yeah, I don't think apologetics is that effective at winning people over to Christ as just in and of itself. But I also know that there are people who will not leave their brains at the door. That you have
right.
to speak their language, and the truth is there are tons of people with great intellects that believe in God. You have astrophysicists, you have poets laureate, you have doctors, and you have all sorts of educated people that we would say are high IQ people that believe in God. So it's not that you have to leave your brain at the door, but sometimes it's that the church has said if you want to be part of our clique, you can't ask questions. You
Right.
have to just accept everything on faith, right? And I don't think that's a very intellectually honest way to to speak to a culture that desperately needs God.
Yeah. The concept of the unmoved mover is, I think, one of the only completely effective arguments for God in terms of apologetics. There's all sorts of, like, you listed the big $5 theology words, right, about the different apologetics. But like the idea of the unmoved mover, there has to be an unmoved mover for anything to make sense, right? And that continues to be the reason. A lot of people are like, well, we're in a simulation or whatever. It's like, because who's the one who moved all this, right? Or
Right.
can it just spontaneously come into existence? I think for me, that's a harder intellectual leap for me than there is a creator, because it's like it's just intellectually impossible for me to get to a place where everything just spontaneously comes into existence without a cause,
Yeah.
or without an unmoved mover. And so that's always been helpful for me. And I agree. I think apologetics is necessary for some people, and that's why it's necessary to do. But one of the reasons it's not a Methodist thing to do is because we're very experiential.
Yeah.
We're academic in a lot of ways, but we're also have this high emphasis on experiential faith,
Right.
and which is why you see the Pentecostal movement coming off of Methodism, and we're very much in the side of Jesus that says, "Come and see." Right? Jesus never gives an intellectual argument for himself or for his ministry. Anytime somebody asks an intellectual question, sometimes he answers with an intellectual answer, but it's usually bent towards the experiential, right? Where at the end of the day, right, the rich young ruler, he's asking all the questions, but it's come and follow me, sell your stuff and come and follow, and then you'll see and understand, and he can't do it, right? And so it's an experiential faith at the end of the day, but a lot of people's first step towards that experience is an intellectual assent that, okay, this is possible for this to be
Right.
true. And so I think apologetics is important from that standpoint. I want to talk a little bit more about disappointment. And how should the Christian, I guess, respond to disappointment in your life? Or do you think that there's like a method, right? Here's the Methodist piece. Is there a method in doing that is most effective to you? Or do you feel like that journey is personal and it's different for each person and how we experience and respond to disappointment from a faith perspective?
Yeah. So all you want me to do is answer like the hardest faith question that we've all been trying to answer for thousands
Yeah.
of years,
Yeah.
and in this podcast. So it's kind of funny going back to Genesis, right? Like the cosmological argument that you just articulated. There's the first cause, the Thomas Aquinas thing, right? Like everything that happens had a cause. What caused the first cause, right? And so a lot of Christians that engage in that apologetic space will go back to Genesis 1 and they'll try to make a scientific argument out of it, which is dumb.
Nonsense.
Right?
Yes.
Because if God had decided to talk about creation in that way and it explained dark matter and black holes and things that a person in the ancient Near East would never have possibly grasped, like, it's not a scientific document. But what it is a response to disappointment, right? So
Okay.
Genesis chapter 1, it's this theological, or, it's poetry, and it's talking about the creation of the world. And we tend to fall into a trap as modern people of faith, or even modern, people who are agnostic or atheistic, of thinking that it's supposed to be a scientific, rational explanation for the beginnings of the world. But actually, it's a theological response, right? And you can see it when you look closer at the text in the Hebrew, and you compare it to other texts that are around at the time, right? So it lines up completely in certain theological ways with the Enuma Elish, which is this Akkadian and Babylonian account of the creation of the world, right? And when I first heard that, I was like, oh no, that can't be true, right? My Christianity, my faith wouldn't allow it at a certain point, right? Like, oh no,
Yeah.
we didn't copy them, they copied us. That's Satan telling lies, right?
Right.
Clearly. But when you consider how we believe scriptures came to be codified and redacted and put together into one, the Old Testament was put together into one document. We believe that started in Babylon,
Yeah.
right?
During the exile.
Yeah, during the exile, you read the Psalms and it says, we sat by the rivers of Babylon and we wept. That was a formative experience for the people of Israel. And you can imagine how this disappointed people, this people who had their capital of their nation burned to the ground, their temple destroyed. They'd been taken into exile. They had gone hundreds of miles from their home. And you can imagine they might have thought that their God had abandoned them. And it's in this place that something incredibly unique in human history happens. And that's that a people who were defeated, who were enslaved, who were, the least of these, they were victims of oppression, came together, and they put their scriptures together. Matt, are you still there?
Yeah.
Sorry, it froze on my screen for a second. Okay, you
Oh,
have to
no, you're good.
edit that part. That's why I was like, what?
Oh, I
Anyways,
don't edit. It's just funny.
fair enough. Okay, so they come together. They start to assemble all of their ancient stories. They start to put their texts together and start asking the question of what it means. And it's believed that this is when that creation narrative really takes form, is in Babylon as these people are being oppressed. And all of this language echoes the Enuma Elish, which is about a god named Marduk who conquers this great sea monster woman named Tiamat. He carves the earth out of her. And at the end of the story, Marduk makes human beings to be slaves for the gods, right? Well, the way that Genesis 1 starts is with the spirit of Yahweh hovering over the deep, right? Well, and that doesn't sound like much to us. We're like, who cares? But that word for deep is tehom, right? That's the Hebrew word there, is tehom. And it's linguistically related to the word Tiamat, right? So in Marduk's story, he has to conquer this great sea dragon lady to create the earth. In the Hebrew story, God hovers over the Tehom, and the Tehom has nothing it can do to God. And instead of God fighting this conflict, God just speaks, and creation comes into being. And at the end of the story, God doesn't create human beings to be slaves. He creates human beings in God's own image, right? And that's kingly language in the ancient Near East. The only people that were talked about as being made in the image of a god were royalty. And so this is a deeply countercultural story that they're telling. It's a theological response. It's saying Marduk may be your God, but our God is the one who actually created the world. And you might think that we're slaves, but actually we are made in the very image of the divine. And that is a countercultural message. And so that rises up from the place of disappointment, but it also speaks to it and says, you're not forgotten. God is with you. And so that angle of disappointment starts at the very beginning of Scripture, and it kind of weaves its way through. You look at some of the greatest narratives that we have in Scripture are people being disappointed. You know, I think of, think about Thomas. We call him Doubting Thomas, which is kind of unfair.
To a guy who was martyred for the faith. Yeah.
Yeah, for a guy who was martyred for the faith, eventually, according to church tradition.
Right.
But I mean, he heard about the resurrection and he didn't believe it at first. And he said, I'll only believe if I put my fingers in the nails, or in where the nails had pierced the hands, and if I put my hand in his side, right? And that seems like, like we're like, oh man, I can't believe Thomas doubted. Well, why wouldn't you doubt?
Yeah.
Right? And
perfectly reasonable.
He's a person who's experienced an incredible amount of trauma, and he believed so deeply in Jesus that he had to see for himself. And he's in a place of disappointment, but eventually his disappointment leads him to go into the upper room, to be there with the disciples, and to encounter something incredible. Paul experiences disappointment. He's shipwrecked. He's bitten by snakes. He's beaten. He's stoned. And yet these people, Paul's the one that said, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. So these are people that experience disappointment. And my worry in the 21st century is that we've created a faith that doesn't know what to do with disappointment. That says that if you're following Jesus, then everything's going to be hunky-dory and everything's going to be okay. And I just want to say, you think you're more righteous than Job? Right? Do you think you're more righteous than Jesus? Do you think you're more righteous than any of the disciples who were martyred, according to church tradition, for the faith? I mean, that seems like a pretty gutsy thing to say.
Yeah, I've never thought of Genesis as a response to disappointment, but when the text did come together in the post-exilic period, that is a response to the disappointment of exile, right? It's our God is one who overcomes disappointment, right?
Yeah.
And we have been restored. Of course, then that disappointment comes again, right? And
Sure.
it's always a cycle. It's never like, oh, we overcame disappointment, and we're never going to be disappointed again. Life is, the older you get, the more you realize life is a series of overcoming disappointments and mistakes or issues and problems, and things not being the way that you want them to be. I always think of, did you ever see the show How I Met Your Mother?
A little bit. I'm not the biggest fan.
Yeah. I always think of that when I think of disappointment, because the whole show is about like, oh, he's gonna find his soulmate or whatever, and he does. But then, spoiler alert, click off the video. Spoiler alert, click off the video. She passes.
Yeah.
And people hated that ending, dude. They hated it, and it was like, I actually think it's gonna take time, but it's actually kind of profound, because it's like that's what life is, and he overcomes that. And that is the last episode. You see how he overcomes that disappointment, and I think that that's like a deeply profound message of like what it means to overcome constantly in your life disappointment, and seeing the Hebrew texts, the Old Testament, as that sign of that. And of course, the culmination of Jesus being the ultimate one who overcomes. There's nothing more disappointing than spending your whole life in service to others and then being mocked and nailed to a cross for it, and then to be risen on the third day, right? That's the ultimate. Like you said, there's a trauma there, the disciples, and a disappointment. Like, we followed this guy for 3 years, right? And now he's dead. And there's a deep disappointment that comes with that. And overcoming that is the story of the resurrection. And so, yeah, I think it's a timely message. I think a lot of people are looking in our world right now and they see disappointment everywhere. They see their government failing them. They see, politicians failing them. They see all sorts of disappointment. And for young people, especially who maybe haven't experienced a ton of that yet, right? It's I think you get better in the Christian life the more you're sanctified, the more you live that sanctification. You get
Sure.
better at
Yeah.
overcoming that disappointment because you don't come to like expect it. You don't live cynically, but you do know it's going to happen and that you can live through it, right? And so, I see a lot of young people, like they look at the politics of the world or the state of the nation and things are going on. And the older people are like, yeah, we've learned not to trust this stuff, right? And then the younger people are like, it's all going to come, crashing down. And there's probably truth somewhere in the middle of the not
Sure.
caring and the not freaking out and the freaking out. There's probably a truth somewhere in the middle of that, where it's the healthy place that we should live. But I just am very intrigued by how we respond to disappointment. And so for, let's say, 90% of my audience is men under the age of 35. The other 10% is young women and some older folks as well. And so
Some
for
Russian
young,
bots.
yes, Russian bots, yeah. So for the young people watching who maybe are going through a period of disappointment, as a minister, what would you say to them?
Yeah. So the question I would ask is, what is your disappointment telling you? Right?
Yeah,
You're disappointed in that we don't have a just society. How are you working to make it more just? Right? If you're
yeah,
disappointed because you see poverty all around you, what are you doing to address that need? So that's a question we ask at the church that I serve, St. Matthew. How can we address this world that seems to be so broken? And at this little church, we worship 174 people on a Sunday morning, counting our online audience,
yeah,
and we distribute 20,000 pounds of food a month. That's our answer to that disappointment. And so it might not be that for every individual might not be able to do 20,000 pounds of food a month or whatever. But ask the question, how am I the answer to this problem? How can I, address this disappointment in a way that it brings life into the world? And some of our disappointments are deep and personal and related to trauma. And those things are maybe more difficult, but they're still telling us something about ourselves, right? If you experience disappointment because you don't feel like you're loved, then that reveals something about yourself, that you're designed to be loved. And there's one person who will always love you, right?
yeah.
That's my cheesy Christian take of the day. But ask the question always, what is it telling me? Because I guarantee you it's telling you something deeper about yourself, something deeper about the world, and maybe it might be a call to personal action.
Yeah. Would you say action is like the best remedy to disappointment? Service and action?
Yeah, I think that that's towards the end of my book, and so I haven't really completed that chapter yet.
Right. Yeah.
No, but yeah, I'd say the being a part of the solution is one of the remedies. The other part is being part of a community where you can weep together, right?
Yeah.
That text from the Psalms, we sat by the rivers of Babylon and we wept. I think it's incredible when you look at it for a lot of reasons, but the thing that always kind of snuck past me was it says, we sat by the rivers of Babylon and we wept. I think it's important that you find somebody to be in community with, where you can process that trauma together, where you can be disappointed together, because I think that's that and action are the two things that I think that we can take from it the most. And my preference obviously is that you do that in Christian community, but
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Of course. Okay. I'm going to shift gears here for a second. You're a United Methodist pastor. You're an ordained elder. Somehow the joke's on the church. We both made it there. That's what I always would say. I remember our seminary days, like, the joke's on the church. They're going to let us in. But the United Methodist Church is coming out of, this is what I always say. We just had 2 of our 5 worst crises in the history of the Methodist movement, going back to the 1730s. 2 of our 5 worst crises back to back.
yeah,
In our entire history, and it was kind of a 1-2 punch on the church. because a lot of churches went through a schism or a disaffiliation or whatever, but they didn't go through it right after COVID.
Yeah.
And we did. And it was not great. And so I kind of want to talk to you about where you feel, because a lot of my viewers care about like the state of denominations, and like
Yeah.
they're very nerdy about that stuff. So they care about that stuff. So I kind of want to hear your take on like, where's the United Methodist Church right now? Where do you see fruit? Where do you see challenges? And what do you think a way forward can be?
Man. Yeah, that we want to talk about disappointment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it is an incredibly difficult thing to be disappointed in your fellow brothers and sisters in Christ for the decisions
Yeah.
that they're making. And just to out myself a little bit, I guess I am probably more towards, I lean more conservative than most United Methodist ministers that are left
Sure.
outside of the continent of Africa.
Right.
I'll say that.
Yeah.
And I have a ton of friends who disaffiliated, and
Yeah.
it hurts my heart that we are no longer part of the same denomination. I still talk to them. I still, pray for them, and we're still friends. But it felt like it felt like during the whole process, both sides forgot to keep the main thing the main thing. And I'll say that also about COVID, disaffiliation and COVID, we all kind of took our eyes off the ball, which our mission as United Methodists is making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And we focus on so many other things. And, we'll say that our churches, and I hear this from our fellow co-workers in the gospel, and I feel kind of like a jerk for saying what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it anyways because you know me.
It's good for the algorithm. Just say it.
I
No,
feel like that I've heard this COVID used as an excuse, and I've heard disaffiliation used as an excuse for your church to die. But
Yeah.
what we've seen across the board, at least with COVID in multiple denominations, is all it really did was accelerate processes that were already happening. If your
Yeah,
church
that's
was
true.
in trouble, it just got in trouble faster. If your church was healthy, you probably managed to weather the storm. And so I think that where we're at now is hopefully in a place where we can keep the main thing, and start actually focusing on the mission of the church. And I noticed a lot of hurt from my brothers and sisters who chose to stay United Methodist. And they were speaking from a place of trauma, and they were actually doing things. Some of them were doing things that were actually harmful for the church body as a whole, because they couldn't get past the trauma of the disaffiliations from their end. But what I think I'm seeing is we're in a place of healing and
Yeah.
sort of readjusting and sort of settling and sort of figuring out what the new orthodoxy is going to be, right?
Yeah.
We've spoken on the issue of human sexuality, but what does that mean for our traditional beliefs? What does that mean for, the things that we find in the Nicene Creed? Or, are those still tenets that we as United Methodists find acceptable, or are they just things that we put in our book of worship?
Yeah. No, it's a big debate right now. And, I'm a firm believer that like the future of the United Methodist Church is fervently inclusive, but also fervently orthodox. And
Right.
those are not two separate things. You can really be both. It's very possible.
Yeah.
There's a lot of folks in the comments who I love that would disagree that that affirming LGBT people is an issue or is a secondary issue, but I think it is. I just think it's a secondary issue. I think for a lot of folks, it's rising to the point of being an orthodox issue because it's biblical interpretation. I know you and I differ on that, and there's a lot of difference within my audience as well on that issue. But now that it's in some ways a settled matter, it's not completely settled. Obviously, nothing's ever completely settled. But for me, it's how do we lift up the core pieces of the church, and how do we get back to making what I think is a really important exclusive claim of the gospel? That is something we have to get back to saying is, what is the point of having a church if we can't stand up and say what we have to offer is something you need, and is something that we all need, that everyone in the world needs, which is a relationship with Jesus Christ through the power of God's church, which he established.
Right.
And that is something that every human being needs. And I feel like in our race for inclusion, we forgot the exclusive claims of the church, which have always been exclusive. And I hate to call them exclusive because it's like the exclusive claims of the church are radically inclusive of all people, right? But they are exclusive claims. Like we think that we believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God and is God made flesh, and that Jesus Christ is the way of salvation, the only sure and certain hope of salvation that we have. Outside of that, it's up to God to decide. And so in terms of church unity, because it's something I've been talking a lot about on this channel, is the unity of the church. How do me being a center-left person, I think is a fair thing. Maybe in the new United Methodist Church, I'm a conservative. I don't know. We'll find out. I don't know. But you were always pretty conservative in the church, have been considered a conservative in the church, although in the North American church at large, you're probably moderate to liberal, but in the United Methodist Church, you're definitely conservative. How do you see those two sides, you being a more conservative in the denomination and me maybe being on the more left side? How do you see us working together and the importance of us working together, and even more importantly, not excluding conservatives from the future of the church? Where do you see that playing out? How do you see that playing out and how it should play out?
So I think it's important, first of all, that we don't demonize each other, right?
Yeah.
So I lean conservative on a lot of issues because of the way I interpret Scripture, but I have to understand in the broad scope of things, there are other ways of interpreting Scripture, right? And so I don't know what to do with Romans 1, and so I'd say my stance on human sexuality, although more conservative than what we have left, is basically I don't know what to do with that more than anything. But also, my brothers and sisters that are very affirming, well, they didn't just arrive at that decision because they were like heretics or something, right? They read scriptures like the letters of John, where it says, "Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love," and they take that seriously, right? The first thing we have to understand is that we're not operating in different worlds. That actually, my brothers and sisters that disagree with me, their mindset is also scriptural. I might have a different interpretation of certain passages than they do, but it's coming from a place that is founded in solid theology at its core. Now, where I think we agree is that it's kind of like we're maybe overshooting the mark. We wanted to be progressive on an issue, and now, and you could see it on the United Methodist Clergy Facebook page, right? Like there are people like we're not a creedal church, which is technically true. Even though you can find a ton of creeds in our book of worship, and John Wesley believed all of the creeds, but you could technically say we're not. But in United Methodism, we have our articles of religion, our confession of faith, and those are unalterable parts of our book of discipline. For the most part, unalterable. It'd be extremely hard to ever get rid of those things. And those are our core beliefs. And we say that this is what we believe, right? Those they have a lot to say about the nature of Jesus, the nature of salvation. And if we let go of those things, then we stop sort of being historical Methodists. We start to become some other entity. And so I think we see kind of a move towards understanding that we can be orthodox and progressive at the same time. And something that I said this at annual conference of the United Methodist Church in Oklahoma, is that, yes, our clergy tend to be progressive, but still in the United States, our laity is conservative for the most part.
It is.
And so we need to not alienate our congregations either. But I think we're starting to get to that sort of level where there's maybe a creedal, progressive Methodism that is taking place. And you had him as a guest on your show, but I'll go ahead and plug Michael's book again. Right? You have United Methodist ministers writing about the Nicene Creed and how it's a spiritually formative thing. I think that we're going to see that. that'll kind of be where the Orthodox, sort of settles in with the progressivism, and we start to move forward as a church. And there, it can seem like a losing battle to try to stay creedal, to try to stay Orthodox, but I don't think it's a battle that's not worth fighting, because we have to be historically Christian. We can't just let go of like the divinity of Christ or the nature of salvation, or start. John Wesley's big thing was his understanding of grace. We can't just say, well, whatever. The rules are made up and the points don't matter, right? That's kind of that's kind of where some of our brothers and sisters want to go, but I don't think that's where the zeitgeist really is.
No, I don't. I do think that more interest in orthodoxy and the creeds and the traditional aspects of the church. I see a lot more interest in like recovering and placing the Eucharist back at the center of our worship, and the young clergy specifically. So I think there's a move away from that 20th century mentality where a lot of our clergy went towards this more kind of ethereal, kind of mystic. That seems like where it was heading. And now I actually think it's there's a lot of social inclusion elements that have stayed with that part of the movement in the 20th century, but it's swinging back towards, we cannot lose our sacramental theology. We cannot lose these kind of core traditional aspects. I see that most commonly in the younger clergy, actually. And so that gives me a lot of hope that churches evolve and change and shift. The Catholics, we love our Catholic watchers. I got plenty of them. They claim they don't. They have quite a bit. They claim they don't, but there's been a lot of shifting, and they believe in doctrinal development. That's actually something, in my understanding at least, that the Catholics hold to, is that there can be some kind of doctrinal development. But I have a lot of faith and hope in the future of the church. And Jonathan, I want to thank you for joining me today. And I want to give you a chance to plug podcast, book. Where can we find you, Jonathan?
Just go to jonathankleinsmith.com and you can find all that stuff. And remember, my mom doesn't know how to spell the word Jonathan, so it's JONATHON, kleinsmith.com. So
I believe that 100%. Your mom just named you and spelled it and was like, I don't even spell it right.
Thought that's how it was spelled in the Bible, but it's not.
But it's not, and I'll tell you, that's just, that's how they spell it in the panhandle, right, Jonathan?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure to put all that in the description so that you guys can go click on all that and follow Jonathan. Jonathan, thanks for being with me today.
I really appreciate you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So thank you all for watching. And I'm Reverend Matt, and I'm the Connectionalist. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.